Thank you.
So thank you. And now I can invite everyone. And first, I will introduce you a little. Okay?
Perfect.
Thank you everyone for coming. Now it's time to start. And before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce our speaker today, Dr. Mahault Albarracin. Dr. Albarracin brings a unique interdisciplinary perspective, combining computer science, machine learning, research on resilience across individual group levels. She's affiliated with several international institutions, including the University of Sheffield and University de Quebec in Montreal, and is actively engaged in both academic research and applied artificial intelligence development. And in today's session, formalizing resilience and the individual and group levels, she will offer insights into how resilience can be understood, measured. So please, we are delighted to have such multidisciplinary expert with us today. Please welcome Dr. Albarracin, please. Thank you.
So thank you. What a warm welcome and welcome everyone. Today I want to talk, as we mentioned, about resilience. It's really a word that we all use and that shows up in clinical psychology, ecology, engineering, and even public policy. But that means something different to almost everyone who uses it. So my argument today is that this vagueness isn't just a semantic nuisance. It actually blocks us from designing precise interventions. And so I'm going to show you that a single formal framework, active inference, can unify the different meanings of resilience and scale from a single person all the way to communities and ecosystems. So I want to start with a bit of a provocation. We tend to talk about resilience as if it's something inside a person. You either have it or you don't. And that framing is wrong. It's limiting. Resilience is relational. It describes the fit between a system and its environment. And because it's relational, it can be formalized, which means that we can measure it, simulate it, and design interventions that target it precisely. So here's where we're going. We have 6 parts. We start with what resilience actually means. I will argue that it has 3 distinct dimensions. Then I will give you a compressed introduction to active inference. And then we'll see how the 3 dimensions of resilience map precisely onto mathematical quantities in that framework. From there, we will look at identity and how the resilience triad plays out in self-models and narrative identity, and how hierarchical, modular organizations create resilience at every scale. And so that bridges us ultimately to the group level, where individual resilience doesn't automatically compose into collective resilience. And we'll finish with some simulation results and practical tools. So then let's start with the resilience. When you read the literature, you find at least 3 distinct concepts, all traveling under the same word. They're not competing definitions. They're orthogonal dimensions. Any resilient systems has to balance all 3. So the first dimension is inertia, the ability to resist change. The metaphor I like here is a diamond. It's structurally hard, it doesn't deform under pressure. In a person, inertia looks like stable core beliefs, a strong sense of identity, deeply ingrained routines and habits. Um, think of a healthcare worker, a nurse, say, who maintains professional functioning during a pandemic. The ward is in chaos, patients are dying, protocols are changing every week, but she keeps showing up, keeps triaging, keeps following procedure. That's inertia. Her training has become so deeply internalized, so woven into her sense of who she is, that it persists even when everything around her is falling apart. And you can notice that this isn't just cognitive, it's embodied. Years of clinical practice have shaped her perceptual habits, her motor routines, her emotional regulation. The stethoscope can feel like an extension of her hand. She doesn't have to think about the steps. They flow from a deeply woven model of her professional self. Now, inertia also shows up in less dramatic context too. So, for example, the person who maintains an exercise routine through a difficult divorce, the researcher who keeps writing through a period of institutional upheaval, the community elder whose values remain a steady reference point while the world shifts around them. In each case, something internal resists perturbation, and that resistance provides a kind of stability that others can rely on. So the upside is obvious: predictability, reliability, stress buffering. So people with high inertia are the ones you can count on in a crisis, precisely because they don't get knocked off course easily. But the downside is equally important. Inertia is only adaptive when your model of the world is accurate enough. If the world changes fundamentally, like a new disease you weren't trained for, a labor market that no longer values your skills, a relationship that has transformed while your expectations haven't, then inertia becomes rigidity. You're holding onto a map that no longer matches the territory. And the harder you grip, the more brittle you become. The diamond doesn't bend, it shatters. The second dimension is elasticity. So it's the ability to bounce back after a disruption. And so the metaphor here is the rubber band. You can stretch it, you can deform it, but when you let go, it returns to its original shape. And so in biological systems, this maps onto two related but distinct regulatory mechanisms. So homeostasis is usually the familiar one, maintaining set points. Your body temperature stays at 37 degrees, your blood sugar stays in range, your sleep-wake cycle follows a pattern. And so when something knocks these um, off, like illness, jet lag, or a stressful week, your regulatory system works to bring them back. But the more interesting mechanism is allostasis, which is often underappreciated. So allostasis isn't just maintaining fixed set points, it's proactively adjusting them to meet the anticipated demands. So your cortisol rises before you wake up, not after. A seasoned public speaker's heart rate increases before the talk, preparing resources for the performance. So the system isn't just reacting to disturbance, it's predicting disturbance and pre-adjusting. And so the distinction matters for resilience because allostatic system can tolerate much wider ranges of perturbations. They don't just passively wait to be knocked off course. They actively recalibrate what on course means depending on the context. So grief is the example I think I find most illuminating. You lose someone close to you and everything is disrupted. Your daily routines, your sense of the future, your emotional regulation. You're genuinely displaced from your baseline state. And for most people, gradually, over weeks and months, this is a not to the same baseline. The person is still gone, but to a functional state. So sleep normalizes, appetite returns, and you can concentrate again. And that's elasticity. The system finds its way back to a livable configuration. But again, there's limitation. Elasticity only gets you back to where you were or somewhere near it. And if where you were wasn't good, then bouncing back is not actually adaptive. Someone in a dysfunctional relationship who recovers from each crisis by returning to the same dynamic isn't actually recovering. An employee who endures burnout, takes a vacation, comes back refreshed, and walks right into the same conditions that burned them out in the first place isn't actually going to thrive. And so a community that rebuilds after a flood in exactly the same flood-prone location is going to suffer floods again. So in each case, the elastic recovery is real. The system genuinely does return to baseline, but the baseline itself is the problem. So elasticity without plasticity is a trap. You keep recovering into the same conditions that keep hurting you. The third dimension is plasticity. And this is the one that people tend to romanticize, so I want to be careful to present both its power and its cost. Plasticity is the ability to develop fundamentally new adaptive strategies. So not bouncing back to where you were, that's elasticity, but growing into something qualitatively different. The metaphor is clay. So unlike the rubber band, clay takes on a new shape permanently. The deformation is the point. So the clinical literature calls this post-traumatic growth, and the research on it is genuinely striking. After serious adversity, illness, bereavement, displacement, some people don't just recover, they report deeper relationships, a reordered sense of priorities, new capacities they didn't have before. The person who loses a job and doesn't just find another similar one, but retrains entirely, moves from finance to teaching, and discovers that the new career feels more aligned with what they actually care about. The person who survives a serious illness and comes out with a fundamentally reorganized relationship to time, to risk, to what matters. These aren't people who bounce back. They're people who use the disruption as raw material for building something the old model couldn't have imagined. And this is where plasticity differs from elasticity in a very real way. Elasticity preserves the old structure. Plasticity revises it. The person isn't returning to an old self, they're constructing a new one. New beliefs about what's possible, new strategies for coping, new ways of relating to other people. So their generative model, which I will explain later, has changed, not just the state estimates within it. Now, at the level of communities, you see the same thing. After a disaster, some communities don't just rebuild, they redesign. They rethink land use, they create new governance structures, they develop mutual aid networks that didn't exist before. The crisis became a catalyst for structural change that the old system would have resisted. But here's the cost, and it's real. Plasticity without sufficient inertia is destabilizing. If everything is revisable, if no belief is held with enough precision to anchor you, then you get identity diffusion, a chronic instability where the person can't settle on who they are, what they value, or what they're doing. And you see these clinically in certain personality disorder where the self model is so fluid that there's no coherent narrative to organize experience around. And you see it in organizations too. The startup that pivots so frequently, it never develops institutional knowledge. The team that reinvents its process every quarter and never builds shared expertise. So plasticity is growth, but growth without roots, it's just drift. So here's the key insight. Real resilience requires all three. And the hard part is balancing them. Too much inertia and you're brittle. You shatter under unexpected stress. Too much elasticity without plasticity, and you keep bouncing back to dysfunctional states. Too much plasticity, and you lose coherence entirely. So the question, and which motivates the formalism that I'm going to present to you, is that how does the system tune this balance? What determines when to be rigid, when to bend, when to reshape? And that's what active inference gives us. So let me give you the fastest possible introduction to active inference. I'm going to prioritize intuition over equations here. The math is in the papers that this talk is based on if you want it, but what matters is the logic. The starting point is deceptively simple. Every organism, every adaptive system, from a bacterium to a person to an institution, has what we call, and I mentioned before, a generative model. It's an internal model of how the world works, including a model of yourself within it. This is your brain constantly running this model, generating predictions about what you should be sensing right now, what sounds you should be hearing, what your body temperature should be, what the person across from you is about to say. And so when those predictions match reality, nothing much happens. The system hums along. But when predictions don't match reality, when what you expected and what you got diverge, you experience what we call surprise. Not surprise in the birthday party sense, but in the information theoretic sense. The negative log probability of the observation under your model. It's a measure of how badly your model failed at that moment. So now, surprise is costly. It signals that your model of the world is wrong in some way. And a wrong model is a dangerous model. It means your plans might not work. Your actions might not have the effects you expect. So organisms are under constant pressure to reduce surprise. And there are two ways to do that. The first is perception. You update your beliefs. You revise your internal model so that it better fits the data you're getting. You hear an unexpected noise, and you update your model of the environment. Ah, there's a construction next door. The world didn't change, your representation of it did. The second is action. You change the world to match your predictions. You're cold. Your model predicts you should feel warm. So you put on a jacket. You turn up the heat. You move to a sunnier spot. Now the sensory data matches the prediction. The model didn't change. The world did. And so active inference is the claim that all adaptive behavior, perception, action, learning, planning, and even attention reduces to alternating between these two moves, updating the model to fit the world or changing the world to fit the model. And this might sound reductive, but what makes it powerful is that it gives us a single formal quantity, free energy, that both perception and action minimize. And that means we can use the same mathematics to describe how you see, how you act, and, as we're about to see, how you maintain or lose resilience. So out of all the quantities in active inference, 3 are going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, specifically for our resilience story. So let me take them one at a time. The first is precision. Precision is how confident the system is in a particular belief or a particular sensory channel. Think of it like a gain knob. So when precision is high on a signal, that signal dominates. It drives belief updating. It shapes decisions. It's hard to override. And when precision is low, the signal is treated as noisy, unreliable, easy to override by other information. And that's not binary. It's a continuous weighting the system is consistently adjusting. And crucially, precision applies to both sensory signals and prior beliefs. You can have a high precision on what your eyes are telling you, or a high precision on what you already believe to be true. When these conflict, when your prior says one thing and your senses say another, whichever has higher precision wins. And so that tension, as we'll see, is at the heart of what makes resilience possible and what makes it fail. The second quantity is preference. Under a generative model, we usually put it under a C vector. And so these encode what outcomes the system is trying to achieve, but they do so in a specific way. So as the observations you expect to encounter if things go well, and not as reward. We're not looking for utilities. We're looking for expected observations. So for example, a person who values social connection has a C vector that expects to observe warm interactions, shared laughter, physical proximity. A person who values professional mastery expects to observe competence, recognition, completed projects. So the C vector is what makes the system care about some states of the world more than others. And so without it, the system would just passively model the world. It would perceive but never act with purpose. And so with it, the system has a direction. It acts to make a reality look like its preferences. And the third quantity is expected free energy. We generally label it G. So this isn't how the system evaluates possible plans of actions. It's before committing to one. And so what makes it elegant is that it naturally decomposes into 2 terms. One is pragmatic. So how well does this plan achieve my preferences? Will following this course of action bring about the observations I want? And the other is epistemic. How much will this plan reduce my uncertainty? Will it bring me information I don't have right now? So a system that only pursued the pragmatic term would be purely exploitative, always going after known rewards. And a system that only pursued epistemic terms would be purely exploratory, always seeking novelty. And so expected free energy balances both, and the balance point shifts depending on how uncertain the system currently is. So when you know what's going on, you exploit. When you don't, you explore. And so that balance turns out to matter enormously for resilience. And so here's the punchline. The 3 dimensions of resilience, inertia, plasticity, elasticity, map directly, formally, onto these quantities. Inertia is high precisions on prior. Elasticity is strong preferences combined with planning depth. And plasticity is low precision on the structure of the model itself. And so that's not a loose analogy, it's a precise mathematical mapping. Each can be quantified, simulated, and measured. So let's unpack. We're going to now go deeper into each mapping and see what the formalism actually buys us. So now we can see how the mapping works. So when an agent has very precise priors, mathematically, it means tight distributions over expected states. New sensory evidence has very little effect on its beliefs. Remember the gain knob. If the prior has the gain turned all the way up, the incoming data barely registers. So in the geometry of belief space, high precision creates deep, narrow attractors. Imagine a landscape, a free energy landscape. And in that landscape, the system sits in a well, a deep, steep-walled well. Perturbations, unexpected events, stressful inputs push the system a bit, but it just oscillates around the same points and settles back. It's hard to dislodge. Now think about what that looks like in a person. Strong professional identity. A surgeon, say, who has spent 20 years developing not just technical skill, but an entire self-concept organized around being a surgeon. That identity has extremely high precision. It's been reinforced by tens of thousands of experiences, by social recognition, by their way their daily life is structured. So when something goes wrong, a failed procedure, a bad review, a reorganization at the hospital, it doesn't shake the core belief. The well is too deep. They adjust, they learned a specific lesson, but the fundamental, I am a surgeon and this is what I do, stays in place. That's inertia working for them. But now consider what happens when the world changes in the way that really does require revising that core belief. A career-ending injury, a technological shift that makes their specialty obsolete, a moral crisis about the institution they work within. The evidence is accumulating that the old model no longer fit, but the precision is so high that the system can't update. So each piece of counter evidence gets discounted, explained away, reinterpreted to fit the existing narrative. And so the attractor is so deep that the system can't climb out, even when staying is no longer adaptive. So at the clinical extreme, this is what a delusion looks like in our framework. A delusion isn't a random belief, it's a belief with pathologically high precision. The prior has so much weight that no amount of sensory evidence can revise it. Someone who believes they're being followed will reinterpret every neutral event, a stranger glancing at them, a car parked on their street, as confirmation. The data isn't being ignored, it's being adaptively assimilated into the high precision prior. So the system is still doing inference, still minimizing free energy, but the precision structure is so skewed that inference can only go in one direction. And this is the formal sense in which too much inertia becomes pathology. The attractor is indefinitely deep and the system has lost the ability to escape it. Now, for elasticity, the formal story is about two things working together: the clarity of your preferences and the depth of your planning horizon. So start with preferences. Your C vector encodes what the system is trying to achieve, but remember, it does so as expected observations. So when everything is going well, these are the observations you expect to be making. Feeling rested, seeing your project progress, experiencing social warmth, whatever it is for you. Now, when something knocks you off, an illness, a loss, an upheaval, there's a gap between what your C vector says you should be experiences and what you're actually experiencing. So that gap is felt as elevated free energy. It's uncomfortable. It's the formal analog of what the felt sense that things are not how they should be. And here's where planning depth becomes critical. A system with a one-step horizon can only see the immediate next action. It asks, what can I do right now to reduce this gap? That's reactive coping. And sometimes reactive coping is terrible. So drinking to reduce anxiety tonight creates a worse gap tomorrow. Lashing out at a colleague relieves tension in the moment, but damages the relationship you need for long-term support. So a one-step system can't see these downstream consequences because its horizon doesn't extend that far. A system with multi-step horizons, say 3, 5, 10 steps ahead, evaluates policies by their expected free energy across that entire trajectory. It can see that tolerating discomfort now leads to better outcomes later. And this is what allostatic regulation looks like, formally. Your set point isn't rigidly fixed. It adjusts based on anticipated future demands. So you tolerate the hunger of fasting because you can see the medical benefits. You tolerate the anxiety of a difficult conversation because you can see it resolves a festering conflict. You tolerate the uncertainty of leaving a stable job because you can project forward to where the new path leads. And so in each case, the system is accepting elevated free energy in the present, which a one-step system would never do, because its temporal model shows this policy minimizes expected free energy across the whole horizon. And so psychologically, this maps onto something very specific. It's the ability to envision a concrete path back to well-being after disruption, and to actually walk that path, even when the early steps are painful. So think of someone who's going through a divorce who starts therapy, knowing the first month will be harder than avoidance, but seeing that the trajectory bends towards something better. Or someone beginning physical rehabilitation after an injury. Each session hurts, but they can hold the image of recovery across weeks and months. And that temporal depth, the capacity to hold a future you can't yet see and use it to tolerate a present that's difficult, is what makes elasticity more than just passive homeostasis. It's active, deliberate, and it requires planning resources that not everyone has access to in every moment. Stress, sleep deprivation, trauma, these all compress planning horizons, which is precisely why they undermine elasticity. So now, plasticity is the most subtle of the three dimensions and also the most powerful. And the key concept here, the one I want you to take away, is degeneracy. I want to be precise about what this word means because it has a technical meaning that's quite different from how people usually use it. So you start with the contrast. Redundancy means having copies of the same thing. Two identical backup generators. So if one fails, the other kicks in and does the exact same job in the exact same way. That's useful, it's insurance, but it's limited. So if the problem isn't a generator failure, but a fuel shortage, both generators fail the same way because they have the same dependency. So redundancy protects against component failure, but not against structural failure. Degeneracy is different. Degeneracy means having structurally distinct components that can perform overlapping functions. So not two generators, a generator and a solar panel. They achieve the same outcome, electricity, but through completely different mechanisms with completely different dependencies and failure modes. So a fuel shortage takes out the generator, but not the solar panel. A cloudy week takes out the solar panel, but not the generator. And so the system has qualitatively different pathways to the same goal, which means it's robust against a much wider range of perturbations. And so in biological systems, degeneracy is everywhere, and it's one of the deepest principles of evolved resilience. Multiple neural pathways can support the same cognitive function, which is why people recover from strokes. Multiple metabolic pathways can produce the same cellular energy. Multiple immune mechanisms can neutralize the same pathogen. And so the body doesn't just have a backup copy. It has fundamentally different ways of accomplishing the same thing. And this is what gives living systems their remarkable capacity to cope with novelty, with perturbations they've never encountered before, because even if one pathway fails in an unprecedented way, a structurally different pathway may still work. So formally, degeneracy is measured by the entropy of the recognition density, or how many distinct routes through belief space lead to the same desired outcomes. High entropy means many routes, which means high plasticity. The system has options. Low entropy means few routes. The system is channeled, locked in. So here's the crucial link. For a system to actually access its degeneracy, to actually switch from one pathway to another when the current one fails, it needs to lower precision on its high-level beliefs. And this is a different kind of belief updating that we talked about with inertia. With inertia, the question was, what state am I in? That's updating within a fixed model. Plasticity requires updating the model itself. Not where am I on the map, but is this the right map? Not how do I get from A to B on this road, but should I be on this road at all, or is there a completely different route? And so that's what makes plasticity psychologically difficult. Revising your model of the current state is relatively cheap. New data comes in, you adjust, you estimate. Revising your model of how the world works, your assumptions about causation, about what's possible, about who you are, that's expensive. It means admitting that the framework you've been operating within might be wrong. It means tolerating the vertigo of not knowing what framework should replace it. It means going through a period where your predictions get worse before they get better, because you've dismantled the old model before the new one is ready. And so psychologically, this is what post-traumatic growth looks like from the inside. The person doesn't just recover to their previous state, they develop a fundamentally new understanding of their situation, new beliefs about what matters, new strategies they couldn't have conceived under the old model, new aspects of themselves they didn't know existed. The disruption cracked open a high-precision model that was too rigid to revise through normal experience, and in the opening, something new could grow. So this is where the formalism becomes clinically important. Bad bootstraps occur when overly precise beliefs about previously successful strategy trap a system in locally optimal, but globally suboptimal attractors. The classic case, a soldier develops hypervigilance, heightened sensory precision, constant threat monitoring. In combat zone, this is genuinely adaptive. It keeps you alive. But when you come home, that same high precision prior, the world is dangerous, stay alert, becomes pathological. It's a deep attractor in the free energy landscape that the system can't escape because the precision is too high to allow revision. Same with addiction. Substance use may start as effective short-term stress regulation, a form of elasticity, but it creates such deep attractor that the system gets stuck. And this reframes clinical intervention in a really precise way. CBT works by systematically presenting evidence against high-precision maladaptive beliefs. Each session chips away at the precision, making the attractor shallower until the system can explore alternatives. Psychedelic-assisted therapy does something similar, but through a completely different mechanism. Pharmacological engagement of 5-HT2A receptors directly reduces the precision of prior beliefs, temporarily flattening the free energy landscape. And so this creates a window where structure learning, plasticity, becomes possible. And so the insight is that these two very different interventions are formally equivalent in what they do to the generative model. They both enable plasticity by reducing the precision of entrenched beliefs. So far, everything has been about one agent, one person. But people don't exist alone. So now we ask, what happens when we scale this up? And the bridge between individual and group is identity, because identity is where the resilience triad plays out most visibly. So I want to take a step back and make a deeper claim, one that comes from recent work with Dalton Shaktivedivel. So far, I've presented resilience as a property that some systems have and others lack, but our argument is stronger than that. Under free energy principle, resilience isn't a special property of some lucky system. It's the condition under which things exist at all. So think about what it means to be an identifiable system. To be a thing, a bounded entity, distinguishable from its environment. A cell, a person, an organization. To persist as this kind of entity means maintaining a boundary between inside and outside, between self and not self. And maintaining that boundary requires work. The second law of thermodynamics is constantly pushing towards dissolution, towards the smearing out of structure, the dissipation of order. So to exist is to resist that push. And resisting that push is exactly what free energy minimization does. It keeps the system in a narrow band of characteristic states, generating evidence for its own continued existence. So the claim is that identity is not a thing you possess. It's a process you perform. Every moment through self-organization and error correction, you're actively producing yourself. Your cells are replacing themselves, your neural connections are reweighing, your immune system is patrolling for threats. Your sense of who you are is being reconstructed through memory, narrative, and social interaction. You are, in a quite literal sense, a working model that is continually regenerated by the very organism it defines. If you stop the process, and the identity doesn't persist in storage somewhere, it ceases to exist. So now this might sound kind of abstract, but the implication is very concrete. It means that the three processes we've been calling resilience, maintaining structure under perturbation, recovering from displacement, adaptivity to novelty, aren't special add-ons that make a system more robust. They are the constitutive processes of being a self. Inertia is what makes you recognizably the same person across time. Elasticity is what brings you back after a disruption, and plasticity is what lets you grow without losing continuity. Take away any one of them, and you don't just have a less resilient person, you have a disintegrating self. And this is why the formal machinery applies at every scale. A cell maintains its identity through metabolic self-production. A person maintains their identity through the ongoing construction of a self-model, a generative model of who they are. An organization maintains its identity through culture, institutional memory, shared practices. And so in each case, the system is doing the same thing. It's minimizing free energy to stay within a characteristic set of states that define it as the kind of thing it is. The math doesn't change. The precision dynamics don't change. What changes is the substrate, the time scales, and, as we're about to see, the consequences of failure. So if identity is a process, if resilience and existence are the same thing, the next question is, what kind of architecture supports that process most robustly? And the answer, which comes out very clearly in the mathematical framework that Dalton developed, is hierarchical modularity. So the intuition is this. Complex adaptive systems do not gain resilience by making every component indestructible. That strategy is enormously expensive and ultimately futile. You can't armor plate every cell in a body and make every employee irreplaceable. Instead, resilient systems are organized into semi-autonomous modules nested in a hierarchy so that failure at one level is contained rather than cascading. So consider your own body. You have roughly 37 trillion cells, and millions of them die every day. Skin cells, blood cells, gut lining cells, they're constantly being lost and replaced. And yet, nothing about your higher level functioning really changes. You don't forget your name when a skin cell died. You don't lose your ability to walk when a red blood cell is recycled. The system is organized so that the higher level functions are distributed across many lower level components, and the loss of any individual component has negligible impact on the levels above. Your circulatory system doesn't depend on any single blood vessel. Your cognitive abilities don't depend on a single neuron. This is the formal sense in which modularity creates resilience. Failure is local, not global. But notice that this requires more than just having lots of components. It requires the right architecture, the right clustering, the right hierarchy of abstraction. The modules need to be internally cohesive, but loosely coupled to each other. Within the modules, components work closely together. Between modules, the interfaces are sparse and well-defined. And so this way, disruption within one module, inflammation in one tissue, conflict in a department, crop failure in one sector, is contained. It doesn't propagate across the system because the intermodule connections are sparse enough to act as natural fire breaks. Now, this principle translates directly to social systems. Think about organizations. A company where all critical knowledge lives in the head of one person, the bus factor problem, is structurally fragile regardless of how talented that person is. When they leave, get sick, or burn out, the whole system suffers because a single point of failure has been allowed to become load-bearing. Compare that with an organization that has distributed expertise across teams, documented practices, overlapping competencies. The loss of any one person is manageable because the knowledge is modular, encoded in multiple people, multiple documents, multiple routines. At the community level, you see the same pattern. A farming community that grows only one crop is a monolithic system. A single drought, a single pest, a single market shift can be catastrophic. A community with diverse livelihood strategies, some farming, some fishing, some trade, some services, has modular resilience. A shock to one sector is absorbed by the others. And this isn't a metaphor, it's the same formal principles. Clustered internal states mapping to external features through a hierarchical architecture where local failure doesn't cascade to global collapse. So this connects directly to identity process theory in psychology. Human identity is fundamentally narrative. It's the story you tell about who you are, where you've been, and where you're going. And the inertia plasticity tension plays out right here. Resilient identity means being able to reinterpret adversity, to fold difficult experiences into your evolving life story, while preserving core values and coherence. Too much inertia and your narrative becomes rigid. I'm a failure becomes a fixed story that no amount of counter evidence can revise. That's rumination. That's learned helplessness. Too much plasticity in the narrative has no coherence at all. Identity diffusion, no stable sense of self. So the people who navigate adversity best are those who can update their narrative without losing its core thread. That's the inertia plasticity balance made personal and is the bridge to our group level analysis because groups have narratives too. Institutional identities, shared histories, and those narratives face exactly the same tension. So here's the core problem. Individual resilience does not compose. A forest of individually resilient trees can still burn down. A group of agents who are all individually inert, all rigid, all resistant to change, is collectively brittle. A group of agents who are all individually plastic, all constantly innovating, is collectively chaotic. Think about a healthcare system during the pandemic. You need some people providing inertia, following protocols, maintaining standards, creating reliability, and you need other people providing plasticity, researching novel treatments, adapting guidelines, innovating. The system needs both. The distribution of resilience styles across the group matters more than any individual's balance. And here's the deepest issue. Resilience alone is insufficient for sustainable outcomes. An agent can be individually resilient, have low free energy, strong attractors, perfectly adapted to its niche, while systematically depleting the shared resource base that everyone depends on. This is the tragedy of the commons, but expressed in free energy terms. Sustainability requires something more. Alignment between individual models and the dynamics of the shared environments. My preferences, my plans have to account for their impact on the resources and social infrastructure that others also depend on. So this is fundamentally a multi-scale problem. Individual free energy minimization can increase collective free energy if agent models are too narrow. At the group level, we can distinguish two kinds of resilience. So absorptive resilience is group level elasticity. The system takes a hit and returns to its previous state. And transformative resilience is group level plasticity. The system uses the shock as informative to fundamentally restructure itself. Most institutions are designed for absorptive resilience. They have buffer capacity, redundancy, emergency protocols. But if the underlying conditions keep producing shocks, absorptive resilience just becomes a coping mechanism for a broken system. And that's usually what happens to systems that becomes too complex. They become too complex for any given individual to properly understand exactly what needs to change. And so highly complex systems become mostly elastic. Eventually they break because they have no ability to actually return to any sort of set system. And transformative resilience requires lowering precision on group level priors, shared norms, institutional structure, psychologically the way we've always done things. And that can also be political or economically costly, which is why systemic change is so hard. It demands a collective plasticity, and collective plasticity requires letting go of shared certainties. So let me show you how this isn't just theory. We've built these systems and we've run them, and the simulations reveal things that pure theory can't. So in recent work with Ines Ippolito, Maria Raffa, and Paul Kinghorn, we built the simplest possible version of this. We put one agent, one resource. The resource was food, which regenerates when not consumed and depletes when consumed. The agent had 3 levels of food availability and 3 levels of satiety, and they can either eat or refrain. And so it plans 3 steps ahead using expected free energy. It's very simple, but the results were striking. Without learning, with a fixed model, agents exhibited extreme behavior. Either they always eat and collapse the resource, or they never eat and they starve. So neither strategy is sustainable. Well, when you enable learning, when the agent can update its transition model based on experience, something really remarkable happens. The agent develops an oscillating pattern. Eat when resources are abundant, refrain when they're scarce. Sustainable behavior emerges from the dynamics without being explicitly programmed. And planning depth matters enormously. Agents that plan 3 steps ahead survive. Agents that plan only 1 step ahead die almost immediately. So the ability to anticipate consequences beyond the immediate moment is mathematically necessary for sustainability. Now, what I find most compelling about these simulations, nobody programmed resilience into the agent. There's no resilience module, no explicit code saying be inert here, be elastic here, be plastic when needed. All the agent has is a generative model, a set of preferences, a learning rule, and a planning horizon. And yet all 3 dimensions of resilience emerge spontaneously from these dynamics. Inertia appears as behavioral consistency. Once the agent discovers the oscillating eat-refrain pattern, it maintains it reliably. It's not programmed to repeat. It repeats because the learned transition model now assigns high precision to that pattern. The same mechanism we described for high precision priors in a person. The strategy becomes a deep attractor in the agent's policy space. Elasticity appears as the capacity to tolerate temporary deprivation. When the agent refrains from eating, its free energy increases, it's hungry, it's in a non-preferred state. A purely reactive agent would immediately eat to reduce that discomfort, but this agent, because it has multi-step planning horizon, can see that tolerating hunger now preserves resources for later. It accepts elevated free energy in the present because its temporal model shows this leads to lower free energy across the trajectory. That's exactly the allostatic mechanism we described earlier, the formal equivalent of the person who tolerates the pain of rehabilitation because they can see the recovery on the other side. And plasticity appears as the learning process itself. The agent didn't start knowing that oscillation was the right strategy. It started with a transition model that was wrong, sometimes wildly wrong. And through experience, through the mismatch between prediction and outcome, it revised that model until it converged on something that works. The sustainable strategy wasn't programmed in. It was discovered through structural learning. And so we push this further. We initialized agent with extremely wrong beliefs and transition probability set to 0 or 1 in the wrong direction. So agents that were certain that eating would replenish food or that refraining would cause starvation. As you'd expect, they perform terribly at first. Their behavior is erratic. Their free energy is high. Many of them die. But the agents with learning enabled, the ones that could revise their transition model based on experience, eventually extracted themselves. It took longer. They went through a painful period where their old certainties were being dismantled and nothing stable had replaced them yet. But they converged. They found the oscillating pattern. They survived. So the agents without learning, the ones with fixed models, died no matter how extreme or moderate their initial beliefs were. If the model happened to be right, they survived. If it was wrong, they died. No recovery was possible because no revision was possible. I think this result really formalizes something that clinicians have known intuitively for a long time. The deeper pathology is not wrongness, it's rigidity. Having wrong beliefs about the world is recoverable. As long as the system has the capacity to learn, to revise, to update its model in the face of counter evidence. Everyone starts with incomplete and partly wrong models. That's not the problem. The problem is when the model is locked, when precision is so high on the existing structure that no amount of evidence can revise it. And so that's when wrong beliefs become permanent, and permanent wrong beliefs are what kill the agent, not wrongness, the permanence. And so this has direct implications for how we think about interventions. The priority isn't to install correct belief, it's to restore the capacity for learning. Give the system plasticity and it will find its own way to a viable model. Remove plasticity and no amount of correct information from the outside will help because the system has no mechanism to incorporate it. So putting it all together, the framework gives us a practical diagnostic rubric. If you see brittle collapse under stress, the deficit is plasticity. The intervention is to lower precision on a structural belief through therapy, safe exploration, or environmental change. If you see chronic failure to recover, the deficit is elasticity. Strengthen preferences and extend planning horizons. Chaotic responses, insufficient inertia. Stabilize core beliefs and the environment. Individual thriving alongside collective decline, that's the sustainability gap. You need to align individual models with the collective dynamics. And if a system absorbs shock but never actually improves, it lacks transformative capacity. You need to enable institutional plasticity, which means loosening grip on the way things were done. And so this gives us a systematic intervention taxonomy, organized by which dimension of resilience is deficient. Need more inertia? Strengthen identity narratives, build routines, stabilize the environment, secure housing, stable employment. Need more elasticity? Extend planning horizons through future-oriented therapy. clarify preferences through goal setting, build allostatic capacity through physical exercise and sleep hygiene. Need more plasticity? Reduce precision on maladaptive beliefs through CBT or exposure therapy. Pharmacologically through psychedelic assisted therapy, or socially through psychological safety, diverse teams, and cross-cultural exposure. The framework really tells you not just what to do, but why it works and when each intervention is appropriate versus counterproductive. So let me bring this all back to the theme of this program, stress resistance, because I think the framework gives us a much sharper way to think about what stress actually is, and therefore what resisting it actually requires. Now, I've got a few minutes. Actually, I've got 1 minute left. Valerie, do you want me to stop or would you like me to get to the end?
Yeah, we can continue, of course.
Okay,
Please.
wonderful. I've got like 3 slides left, so if you'll humor me. In active inference terms, stress is surprise that exceeds the system's current capacity to minimize free energy. Not just surprise, we experience small surprises constantly, and they're fine. They're just belief updates. Stress is what happens when the rate and magnitude of prediction error outpaces your ability to process them. Your model is failing faster than you can fix it. The world is changing in ways you can't keep up with. You're receiving information that doesn't fit your generative model, and the mismatch is accumulating rather than resolving. So think about what that feels like phenomenologically. You're overwhelmed. You can't plan because you can't predict. You can't act effectively because your model of the consequences is unreliable. You feel like you're losing your grip, and in a formal sense, you are. The system's free energy is climbing, its predictions are degrading, and its ability to select adaptive policies is compromised. That's stress. Now, here's the reframe that I think matters most. Stress resistance is not about eliminating surprise. That would mean living in a perfectly predictable world, which is impossible. It would also mean you never learn anything. You never encounter anything new, never grow. A life without surprise is a life without information, and information is what drives adaptation. So the goal can't be to avoid surprise. Instead, stress resistance is the capacity to maintain adaptive precision dynamics under conditions of elevated surprise. So when surprise hits, the system needs inertia, the ability to keep core functions running while the model is under strain. But inertia alone isn't enough because sometimes the surprise is telling you something real, that your current state is no longer viable, that you've been displaced from where you need to be. And so that's where elasticity comes in. The system needs to maintain clear preferences and sustainable and sufficient planning depth to navigate back towards viable states. And sometimes the surprise is so fundamental that neither enduring nor recover will do. The old model itself is what's failing. That's where plasticity becomes essential. The system needs enough flexibility in its high-level beliefs to revise its model of the world when the evidence demands it. If you scale that to groups, a stress-resistant organization isn't one where where no one experiences surprise. It's one that maintains modular structure so that surprise in one part doesn't cascade to all parts. So I'll leave you with this. The most stress-resistant systems are not the hardest ones. They are the ones that know when to be hard, when to bend, and when to reshape. Resilience is not about being unbreakable. It's about having the right model of yourself and your world, the right level of confidence in that model, and the willingness to revise it when the evidence demands it. And the beautiful thing about this is that the mathematics is identical at every scale, from a single neuron to a person to a community to a society. What changes as you scale up is not the formalism, but the cost of getting it wrong. So here are some of the papers that I've based today's talks on. If you want to read them, please, by all means. They are a little bit theoretical, and I've talked today in more intuitive and practice-anchored ways. And thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really really like we I try first I try to understand maybe plasticity is the most important thing in our life. And first, I thought this is a really base for future, for like an engine of progress. But then you have pointed to a balance of all this, all inertia, elasticity, and now I understand more that we should have a balance on that. And thank you that you're pointing on this idea because this creates more understandable world. Yeah, how to react in this world. But sometimes I understand that some systems in educational sphere or political sphere doesn't work anymore. And maybe this is because of their inertia, yes. But thank you so much for all this information and your research. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. I unfortunately have to leave because I have a meeting right after this and I'm already over time. If anyone wants to send me questions, you can direct them my way. I'll be happy to answer any question anybody has. It was really lovely to be talking to you all today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Bye.
Bye.